This video is about
American history.
Thanks, kiddo. In this video, I'm going to focus on three major American legislative events related to the expansion of slavery in the first half of the 19th century: the Missouri Compromise of 1820, the Compromise of 1850, and the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. We won't be here long, so we're going to keep our goals limited. By the end of the video, you should be able to identify federal legislative decisions related to slavery in the early 19th century, and you should be able to describe the details of those legislative decisions. The historical context for these legislative events is that the United States physically expands its territory in the first half of the 1800s through payment, like the Louisiana Purchase, through war, like the Mexican-American War, and through negotiation, like with Britain and Spain, to secure the country's northern and southern borders. With each expansion, Americans would argue about whether the institution of slavery should be allowed to expand into the newly acquired lands. The three pieces of legislation in this video are the results of the recurring tension and dissension that territorial expansion caused. When Missouri sought statehood in 1819, the question of whether it would be admitted to the Union set off a fierce sectional debate between Northern and Southern legislators. Missouri's ratification, or Missouri's entry into the Union, would upset the tenuous balance between slave state and free state representation in the U.S. Senate. To quell the controversy, Speaker of the House Henry Clay worked out a compromise of three parts. First, Maine would separate from Massachusetts and be admitted as a separate free state. Second, Missouri would enter the Union as a slave state, maintaining that balance. And third, any remaining territory of the Louisiana Purchase, which lay north of the 3630 parallel, which you can see indicated there, would be closed off to slavery. Clay's plan maintained a principle first established during the time of the Articles of Confederation, that the federal government was in charge of deciding where slavery could and could not legally exist. The Missouri Compromise seemed to satisfy everyone, at least for the time being. As you can see from the map, there was still some room for the North and South to add some states to hopefully maintain the balance in the Senate. But it's also clear from this map that there is more room to add northern free states than there is southern slave states, and that means the balance will likely be upset in the future. And then we fast forward 25 years to 1845, when Texas joins the United States as its 28th state. The Mexican-American War starts the next year and ends in an American victory in 1848. As a result, the United States adds a bunch of territory in the Southwest. In the context of North versus South, free states versus slave states, this war can be seen, and actually was seen by Americans at the time, as an attempt to give slavery room to grow and therefore preserve its power in the federal government. After the war, the people of Texas argue that they should have all the territory that's outlined in green there. And the federal government starts working that out because there are competing land claims. In 1849, gold is found in California, which the U.S. now controls. Dreams of striking it rich cause thousands of people to move there, so it is quickly ready to join the Union as a new state. But the territorial government wants to join as a free state, even though part of their territory extends south of the Missouri Compromise line. So in 1849, the federal government is trying to figure that out too. In the end, to deal with these issues and others, and the potential implications for pro- and anti-slavery forces, 5 different bills are passed that combine to make up what we call the Compromise of 1850. First, Texas was denied all of the territory that they thought they should have, but they got $10 million from the federal government to use to pay off some Texan debt. Second, while slavery remained legal in Washington, D.C., America's international reputation was hurt by the fact that trading, buying, and selling enslaved human beings happened in public spaces in the nation's capital. So the second bill in the compromise banned trading enslaved people in Washington, D.C. Third, California was accepted into the Union as a free state. This clear violation of the Missouri Compromise line upset Southern politicians, but they were placated by the fourth element of the compromise. Utah and New Mexico were made new territories, and they could decide for themselves whether they would allow slavery once they were ready to join the Union. This second violation of the Missouri Compromise was based on a concept called popular sovereignty. This concept said that the residents of the territories had the legal authority to decide whether to be a slave state or not, and write it into their state constitutions when applying to join the Union. However, this violation of the Missouri Compromise, or this application of popular sovereignty, it was a special deal for just California, Utah Territory, and New Mexico Territory. It was just a one-off thing. The final piece of the compromise is another form of appeasement to the South, an enhanced Fugitive Slave Act. This new law superseded the original 1793 Act, and it essentially increases the fines for free citizens aiding a quote-unquote fugitive slave. It also increases fines for federal marshals or police officers of the time that fail to arrest a quote-unquote fugitive slave. These fines were intended to discourage everyone from helping enslaved people to escape or hide. Interestingly, or perhaps ironically, the passage of the Fugitive Slave Act actually intensified enslaved people's use of the Underground Railroad. The whole compromise, these 5 pieces, took 7 months to debate and get through Congress. Eventually, the individual laws went through, and once again, tensions were eased. Our final legislative event is the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. And as a bit of background, like many other Americans, Senator Stephen A. Douglas envisioned a transcontinental railroad and thought the best place to build it was through the unorganized territory shown here. He imagined the railroad transforming the Mississippi Valley into the nation's financial center away from the Northeast, and transforming the city of Chicago into the economic heart of the nation away from New York City. Now, the Mississippi River just happened to form the western border of the state of Illinois, which just happened, I'm sure it's a coincidence, just happened to be the state that Douglas represented. Again, I'm sure it was a coincidence. If the land that this railroad was to go through remained an unorganized territory, the federal government would have the final say on whether the railroad could go through there or not. If the territory became one or more states, then each state government could decide to allow the railroad to go through their land without involving the federal government. The senator wanted to divide the territory into 2 new territories and hopefully states in the future, Nebraska and Kansas. Douglas needed the support of Southern senators to get his bill passed, but Southern senators were very nervous about the idea of creating 2 new states above the Missouri Compromise line because they would enter the Union as free states. In exchange for Southern support, Douglas drafted what became known as the Kansas-Nebraska Act. It created these 2 new territories. It also officially repealed the Missouri Compromise and eliminated the Missouri Compromise line. In its place, popular sovereignty became the new law for determining the expansion of slavery. By repealing the Missouri Compromise, and this is the important point, by repealing the Missouri Compromise, the federal government gave up its authority to determine if states will allow or ban slavery when they join the Union. This was part of the deal that Senator Douglas made with these Southern politicians. 2 new states would be created, but they could be slave states if the majority of people living there supported slavery. And with the Kansas-Nebraska Act, we have the federal government giving up its authority or its power to determine where slavery could and could not legally exist, and vesting that power or that authority with individual territorial or state governments. One of the results of the Kansas-Nebraska Act was a sequence of violent events and confrontations known as Bleeding Kansas. When this act was passed, pro-slavery and anti-slavery organizations started raising money to send settlers with their political opinion to Kansas so that their ideology would be reflected in the state constitution when Kansas was able to join the Union. Each group used intimidation and violence to try to expel the other group. Eventually, Kansas joined the Union as a free state in January of 1861, just a few months before the Civil War started. And that's it. We've covered a fair bit of ground pretty quickly, but there are two main points that I want you to walk away with. First is the increasing tension, or the increasing north-south tension regarding slavery being caused by westward expansion. And the second thing is the transition from federal authority regarding the expansion of slavery to state authority. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.